members, it's after 2 o'clock. In line with the other subcommittees following the change in administration, we need to appoint a chairman of this subcommittee, which is now the Welfare Reform Subcommittee, following decision at the 28th November Full Council that the sub has full delegated powers to consider matters of policy and expenditure to do with welfare reform. So could I ask for nominations for chairman, please? Councillor Ogilvie.
I would like to nominate Councillor Collins.
No other nominations. Councillor Collins, can you take the chair, please?
Right, afternoon members, thank you. We go to item 2 on the agenda, Sederunt, apologies. I have none, it's a full complement.
No apologies, Chairman, all present.
Thank you. Moving on now to item 4. Oh sorry, declarations of interest, item 3. Any declarations of interest? No, okay, item 4. We can go to policy headroom funding options to alleviate impacts of welfare reform. John, are you aware of any additional information or anything further to add to this report?
Thanks, Chair. No, nothing further to add. Report before you. Have to take any questions, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, members, any questions? Ian?
Thanks, Chairman. It's just a general, no update. I thought there's got to be an announcement on the 4th of December in regards to further funds becoming available. Maybe no particular on this item, but have we had any notification in regards from Westminster Parliament?
Thanks, Chair. No, the latest information we have is that allocations for discretionary housing payment will be made in January. We haven't got an exact date, but I don't think we're anticipating anything pre-Christmas. So we're not worried about anything to be announced this side of Christmas.
Alistair?
Thanks, Chair. It's in relation, sir, to the appointment of money advisors. If my reading of the report and my understanding of the report is correct, we're now talking about 4 money advisors posts being created. And I wondered, Chair, is it envisaged that these will be sort of decentralised and they will operate in the respective 4 districts?
Thanks, Chair. Yes, that's correct. We'd be looking for 4 to cover the 4 former districts. So we'd have 1 in each area.
Yeah.
Thanks very much, Chair. I take it, for instance, and I'm thinking particularly about Wigtown, you know, that they will have a peripatetic role. They'll be out, you know, bearing in mind it's 34 miles from Isle of Whithorn to Stranraer. I take it they will go in circuit, for want of a better term.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Yeah, just to confirm, we see these jobs certainly being out and about, operationally dealing with households and clients that are identified to be in need of this advice and support. So we're trying to make them as active and out in the community as far as we can.
Thank you. Colin?
Thanks, Chair. I mean, I think Ian's right. When we met with the Scotland Office Minister, David Mundell, he specifically said at the meeting there would be an announcement in the autumn statement regarding funding around the bedroom tax. So it's good to see that the Minister's in the loop. Obviously, we have to wait to January now, so it makes sense, I think, to roll this funding over because we don't know exactly what the outcome of that statement will be. Can I just ask a couple of things on the actual proposals? So the one on credit unions in particular, the proposal says expansion of credit union project, and then it specifically says extend the credit union development worker post and have an admin post. So that tells me what we're going to do in terms of the post, but what it doesn't really tell me is what that'll physically mean in terms of the expansion of credit unions. What, you know, presumably the role will be to develop a plan, but if we've got a sort of time scale on that, what sort of scale of extension are we actually looking at in terms of credit unions? Because I think the difficulty we've got at the moment is a pretty small scale operation in terms of the credit unions in Dumfries and Galloway. I'm just keen to get my head round what actual extension we're looking at here, and is it enough, basically, or is there something else we're required to do? Because it is quite a small amount of money for the scale of the task, I think, needed to expand credit unions. So I'm just trying to figure out exactly what it is we're proposing to extend here.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, Chair. The proposal to extend particularly the credit union development worker post effectively to an 18-month position was to allow him to do the work that Councillor Smith refers to. What we see will happen is that probably in about, once the development work has been in post for about 6 months, he'd be bringing forward specific proposals to develop the credit unions that he's working with. He's been in post now about 6 or 7 weeks, and he's already made quite an impact in terms of engaging with the credit unions, understanding how they operate, seeing where potential areas could be expanded. But the thrust of the proposal was, if we didn't fund that post for a further 12 months, he'd be getting to the point where he'd just about be formulating a plan when the post would be terminated. So it was really to allow sufficient time for the development worker to prepare, produce, and certainly oversee the initial implementation of his plan. What I certainly anticipate is once those plans are developed and reported back through the project group, which I'm a member of, that we will be bringing a detailed report back to this subcommittee to consider, to look at, and to agree as appropriate. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. I'm aware that there is an employee of Third Sector First who also works in relation to credit unions, and I wonder what their remit, if any, is to work collaboratively with the officer within the council to take forward the interests of a credit union establishment.
Thanks, Chair. Certainly, Third Sector First are members of the Financial Inclusion Strategy Working Group, and at the meeting that we had in November, they noted their interest to work with us on this piece of work, and discussions are ongoing with Third Sector First about how they could fit in, contribute and support to the work that the development work is taking forward. So those links have been established. How they are developed and progressed, I think it's relatively early stage to advise at this stage, Chair.
Thank you. Jane?
It's really about the issue of sustainability with respect to proposal number 2. I would be wondering, Chairman, about where is the background information to support this level of spend, and presumably if we're talking about establishing posts, that means an ongoing commitment. I would like to see exactly what we would be getting and why we would be establishing these posts before we would make any commitment on a long-term basis. I think that would be very helpful to get the information. And I think that's exactly the same issue with respect to the credit union worker. I think that's an extremely important piece of work that came out through all the work that we've done in this committee in the past. I'm sure that's the right thing to do, but I really would like to see exactly what outcomes are expected from establishing that particular amount of money to be spent. So a little bit more information, I think, Chairman, at this stage. Finally, might I also add in proposal number 3, I must admit I looked at all of these things and thought, but hang on a second, surely we just agreed a commission, and how does that square with the sort of level of expected spend here? I think I'd like to see considerably more backup to explain why we would apply these particular resources to this. Not saying we shouldn't, but I think it should be more clear as to why we are applying that level of funding.
Thank you. John?
Thanks, Chair. Happy to bring back further detail on each of the proposals. If members agree either in principle or to roll forward, awaiting the outcome of the DWP allocation, there will be a further opportunity to consider these proposals in detail. We can certainly bring forward, if members wish it, more detail on the justification for the money advisor posts. more in relation to the current and future work of the credit union development worker. In terms of proposal 3, the Advice and Information Commission, that was a specific decision of the Policy and Resources Committee to go for that kind of hybrid option 4 model, where we have the core commission, but plus kind of a pot of money for any enhancement or specialist advice that would be identified at a future date. The P&R committee agreed that £35,000 of the existing commitment would go towards that. This is a way of lifting that up to a more substantive amount to allow the council and its partners to do a bit more work in relation to that kind of specialist enhanced information. But we can certainly flesh that out in much more detail if that's what members wish, when we bring the report back for final confirmation once the DWP made their announcement.
Thank you. Yep. Alistair? Oh, sorry, Ian?
Frank, just picking up on the point, it was the last point that Jane made was the point I was going to pick up on in particular. Quite happy to agree to the principle of what's in front of us here. Some of us got included in a press statement earlier. I think Chairman was one of them, which is embargoed until tomorrow, but there's information contained within that press statement clearly outlining across the whole Dumfries and Galloway the increase in doorstep money lending. So I just wonder how that could possibly, the item 3 could possibly tie into that. I mean, that's maybe a trading standards thing, maybe rather than a, so I just don't know if that's part of the equation as well. So just to pick up on that, John, please.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, that is an issue that we are looking at. It's an action within the financial inclusion strategy to develop proposals to tackle illegal money lending, and we've made contact with the illegal money lending unit, which is the national body in Scotland, and we've invited them to come down to the next financial inclusion strategy working group meeting in January. Once we've done that, I think they'd be more than happy to come along and speak to this subcommittee as well. So we've already made contact, and it's something that we're on top of.
Thank you. Alistair?
Thanks, Chair. It's just the question of which would be the most expeditious way of dealing with it then, because if you go to the recommendation 2.2, it rightly, sir, in my view, uses the terminology to alleviate the impacts of welfare reform, and that's exactly the situation we're going to be in, and increasingly so, some of us would argue, in the years ahead. And therefore, I would certainly have no problems whatsoever with agreeing in principle, the additional resourcing today. By all means, let's, have further information if the subcommittee feels that that's essential. But would that be, in the interest of expediency, Chair, would that be reported back to the P&R committee or come back to the subcommittee? Because, as I say, I would obviously want all members, to be supportive of what's being proposed, and I would like to see, my question, sir, is what's the quickest way to achieve that? As I say, approve here today in principle and refer to the full P&R committee, or approve here today in principle and bring it back here? Be guided by yourself, Chair.
Thank you. John, would you like to give us an idea of the time frame that we're speaking about in relation to bringing it back, preferably to the subcommittee, I would imagine?
Thanks, Chair. My understanding is, as this subcommittee's now got full delegations, then the first assumption is that it would come back to this subcommittee for a decision in terms of agreeing the funding. I think the key issue is at what point the DWP announcement is made, and if we miss the committee cycle for this committee, but it's P&R committee before that, then we could seek advice about whether or not it would be appropriate to take it to the P&R committee to get an early decision, or to convene a special subcommittee to ratify the decision. At this stage, we can't plan because we haven't got an exact date of the DWP allocation, and that will be the trigger for this subcommittee to decide where that funding is eventually allocated.
Yeah, thanks, Alistair. I'm hopeful, and I believe we have another meeting of this subcommittee in January. So I would hope then, Alistair.
Well, that's reassuring, sir, and on the back of what John has just said, if we can do that, because as I've already said, time without sort of sounding melodramatic, this isn't just, an issue of experience. It's a bit more serious than that. And I think we've got to be in a position, as it were, really to get on and provide the resources that are needed. I'll certainly go with that, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Gail?
I didn't ask to speak, but I will anyway. Thank you.
Well, it must have been the way you were conducting
Right,
your
I'm
pen.
I'm just fiddling, yeah. Actually, it's just on the back of Councillor Maitland's comments. My recollection from P&R was that we were going to have a cocktail of how we brought forward commissions, and we would have the main core commission as the large one, and then establishing the other specialist advice commissions if required. And that money was set aside. Now, this almost makes it look as if they're going to establish a specialist commission, whether it's needed or not. I slightly agree with Councillor Maitland here that I would need to see if there's a requirement for that once the core commission is up and running, and if there is, the detail of the specialist sort of work that would need to be done for that. Because as I say, the wording as it is within the box is that it's almost going to be done whether it's required or not, and I couldn't agree to that. That's £105,000 that I couldn't agree to.
Okay, thanks, Gail. John?
Thanks, Chair. Just to clarify, at the end of paragraph 3.3.4, it does say that any specialist commission would come forward likely after Q2 of 14-15. So certainly the intention is to inform any development of a specialist commission on the basis of the experience of the new contract. I suppose what's implicit in that is that if there is no identifiable need for an additional service, then we would need to bring that back to this committee initially to say, the core contract is operating, would you like to use this in a different way? But the line that we're taking is it's best to have that money earmarked now while we're able to, and that's something to develop if required. But the intention is to do it sequentially and not to rush at an additional commission in advance of April. We're going to let the new commission work through, so it'll be at least 2 quarters before we bring anything back to this subcommittee.
Colin?
I think it's worth pointing out to members of this committee, when you sat in Policy and Resources, you agreed when it came to third sector funding to roll over £103,000 to supplement third sector grants and commissions as well. As it happens, you didn't actually spend it, but you certainly agreed to roll that over for any additional demands that may come from the third sector as well. So there's a precedent there of setting aside sums of money and then obviously investigating how that may or may not be allocated. The worst thing we can do is to suddenly discover that we do need a particular piece of work done in the future and then be asked, well, where's the budget coming from? Because you don't have any money set aside. There's certain precedents of the work of the Policy and Resources Committee when it comes to third sector funding, and certainly this is no different. I see it just because it's got the word commission beside it. I think that's the only difference.
Ian?
To pick up on a similar point, and that's why I mentioned trading standards, because it is identified as being a commission. So therefore, if for some reason it was better spent in that area rather than going out as a commission, I'd like to keep it kind of in those broader terms. So if that could just be reflected as well.
Okay, thank you. No other questions. Go to the recommendations. 2.1, agree to carry forward the allocated funding of 262,000 for 14-15. Agreed. And 2.2, to note and consider the allocation, and so on, and so on. Jane?
Right, but can our decision reflect that we wish further justification for these allocations? Because the truth is, Chairman, is that I've been given 3 suggestions here, which are recommendations, but there's an argument with respect to, for example, under occupancy, the bedroom tax, to alleviate that. Audit Scotland suggested that we ought to be assisting, councils ought to think about assisting tenants in finding lodgers to alleviate that. That was an Audit Scotland suggestion. There's nothing here at all, and in fact that has been resisted. And I would like to see that piece of information and piece of work done to suggest what could or could not be done to help people with respect to managing this particular problem in a sustainable fashion. It's not here.
Well, I would suggest, sir, that you note and agree in principle the allocation, subject to further report coming back.
All members content with that? No?
No, quite happy with noting, but I'm not agreeing them at this stage. So if we have to divide on that, Chairman, that's fine.
Okay, can we note in principle then, subject to a further report coming back?
Can I just pick, thanks, Judge. I've asked this question many times in the past. When we note something, what do we actually do in real terms with agreeing? So note and agree, note in principle, I've not got any issues. If it just note, we're still agreeing it anyways. But I'm happy to tag on the back if it's the right thing to do about the further report, but either I make it a clear recommendation of 2.3, a further report with the detail as per the three allocations, the £262,000.
Well, you're correct. You're either noting the proposals or you're agreeing them in principle, subject to the further report's going to come to the next meeting anyway, but it's whether or not today you're just noting what's in front of you or you're actually agreeing the principle of what's in front of you, subject to more detailed information and a final decision.
Thank you. Alistair?
I'm delighted to take the advice, sir, because I don't believe you can note something in principle. You either note it or you don't note it, and we're noting this at 2.2 as I understand it, and you're agreeing in principle on the back of it, subject to provision of further information.
It looks dangerously close to dividing here. Ronnie?
There's a contradiction in that, because if we note it with, in principle, whatever, for a further report, and in the further report we say we don't want it, then we've agreed something. So, we're hostage to fortune. Either we agree that we have that headroom funding or we don't. I mean, we're just putting off a decision to another day based on some information that we might or might not agree with.
Thank you. Alistair?
Well, let's cut to the chase, Chair. As far as I'm concerned, we're noting, at 2.2, we're noting and agreeing in principle the allocation of 262 policy headroom funding for the proposals, subject to the provision of further information to be brought before the committee, as it were, as soon as possible.
Thank you. Ian?
No, I agree with that. I still say we're agreeing to the principle of the 262k allocation as a round figure, as a whole figure. It's just I've not got any reason to defer to the or try and change the three principles that are in each box. It's just I would like to see the detail, and at that point we can make a considered, informed decision. So I have no issues with what Alice has just put forward there.
Jane?
Well, let's be completely clear that I'm quite happy to note those proposals. I want to have further information about them, but I'm only noting them at this stage. Thank you.
I hear a divide coming on.
Yes, and I have no compunction in saying that I want to do something more than merely note. I want to note and agree in principle, and I've already made my views clear, Chair. So I will move that as a motion.
Okay.
Thank you. Colin?
More than happy to second that. It's very clear in the document that it's all up for review, subject to the DWP's announcement. If the DWP announce they're going to slash the amount of money we get for discretionary housing benefit, then we're going to have to revisit that to potentially top it up. So it's all subject to review anyway. So I'm not entirely sure why we're dividing on it. Ultimately, we're going to get more detailed reports and more updated information. But I don't have any suggestions at all on the table from anyone other than the three that are in this paper here. So while people are not prepared to agree with them, they haven't actually come up with an alternative. So I'm quite happy to second that.
I've just given you one.
Thank you. Jen, do you have a second?
Yes, I'm happy to second.
Okay, thank you.
Chairman, excuse me. Sorry. Chairman, there's a motion by Councillor Geddes, seconded by Councillor Smith, to note and agree in principle the allocation of 262k policy headroom funding to the proposals detailed in the report. Subject to further information on the detail of these proposals and obviously the decision of the DWP announcement in January. The amendment by Councillor Maitland, seconded by Councillor McGregor, is to simply note the proposals detailed in the report. Did you have an alternative proposal, Jane, that I didn't pick up?
No, at this stage, I will leave it like that. I can come back with any alternative proposal. We're dealing with what's in front of us.
Basically, the motion then is to note and agree in principle, and the amendment is just to simply note proposals. Chairman, motion or amendment?
Motion.
Councillor Carruthers?
Motion.
Councillor Geddes? Councillor McGregor?
Amendment.
Councillor Maitland?
Amendment.
Councillor Ogilvie?
Motion.
Councillor Smith? 5 votes for the motion, 2 for the amendment. The motion is carried.
Thank you. Can we go now to item 5 on the agenda, welfare reform policy issues? Do we have anything you'd like to add, John?
Nothing further to add to the report, Chair. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Colin?
I think the report's self-explanatory. A lot of the information in the memo is pretty dated now, particularly given the fact that we've changed the criteria. But can I just come back to the point that I raised, I think, in the seminar, which was around how we treat DLA. When you apply for housing benefit, at the moment, DLA isn't taken into account, but when you apply for discretionary housing payments, it is taken into account when it comes to income, with the exception, obviously, the bedroom tax area. We're not doing a financial assessment, but we're still basically taking it into account when it comes to a financial assessment, if I'm reading this right. So why are we still taking DLA into account when it comes to a financial assessment?
Thanks, Lorna.
Thank you, Chair. We have started to do disregard DLA for private sector size criteria cases as well as social sector size criteria. Historically, we've always taken DLA into account, simply because the level of the budget implications. Where we start to disregard DLA, it opens up the level of the scheme. So we've had to make a decision on whether it's restricted or not. Now, obviously, at this point in time, the schemes, the amount of funding we'll have is quite considerably more than it has been in previous years. So it's allowed us to relax that application on disregard of DLA, but we have extended it further than just social sector at this present time.
So we're not taking into account DLA in terms of the income?
Whereas a size criteria restriction in private sector.
When it's not the size criteria, if somebody's applying for discretionary housing payment, we're still taking DLA into account when we carry out a financial assessment.
Yes, that's
I'm just
correct.
wondering, is, apart from budget restrictions, which I suppose, to be fair, we don't really have any this year. So, but apart from budget restrictions, why would we not take into account? Why would we take into account DLA when it comes to somebody's income, based on the fact that DLA is for basically people are classed as having additional costs because of their disability, which is why DLA is not taken into account when it comes to housing benefit. So what would the argument be for taking it into account when it comes to discretionary housing payments, other than budget restrictions?
Where someone's got DLA in payment, if they've got extra costs related to that DLA, they're also taken out as well. So they should, where someone has got that extra expenditure, we're also asking for their expenditure details. So we'll offset their income and the related expenditure related to that disability.
Confident at the moment, though, that we are fully offsetting it, because it's quite by definition, travel costs and additional things that you may not necessarily remember to put into something like that. They're not obvious things. You don't have a carer, for example, but by definition, a disability may involve different diets or anything like that. Are we absolutely clear that when we are assessing somebody that we're fully taking absolutely everything into account that may impact on their disability? Are we confident that our sort of criteria covers that, basically?
Certainly in the decision-making process, our decision-makers, that's something that they are asked to look at, and it's part of their considerations. When you're right, when someone's filling out an income and expenditure form, they don't always think of the expenditures that are not occurred week on week that crop up, but we do go back to claimants and double check figures and double check expenditures. Obviously, I couldn't put, say, hand on heart, it's 100%, it definitely always happens, but staff are trained to look at that and actually make those assessments and double-check expenditure, especially in disability cases.
Given the fact that we don't have financial pressures this year, certainly, could potentially in future years, but given we don't have financial pressures this year, would it not be more prudent to err on the side of caution and disregard DLA, and then we're effectively ensuring that people are getting assessment based on what their potential costs might be for their disability? Because as I say, we don't take DLA into account when we calculate housing benefit. We just seem to take it into account when it comes to discretionary housing payments.
Certainly we've got the scope this year to look at it. I mean, we're just now completing an exercise where we've looked at all social sector cases, and we're now going to review all previous DLA applications in view of the amount of fund that we've got left. So there is going to be potential for us to really look at that, and if there's a need in there for what we've had already applied, we'll review it and have a look at it.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Scobie has requested he is unable to address the committee in light of the paper at the appendix submitted by himself. So, as chair, I'm prepared to have Councillor Scobie speak to his paper and give you 3 minutes, Willie, to fire it across the room at us. Thanks very much.
I'll try my best, Chair, in 3 minutes. It is a big issue. Colin has already touched on one of the aspects of this, and that's the discretion housing payment, and the paper lays out. This is a policy issue, a political issue for the Council and Welfare Reform Subcommittee to recommend or take the decision that it has decision-making powers to say that they would treat as an exemption that the disability living allowance, as indeed they do, and Colin has more than eloquently put it, it's not considered in housing benefit, disability living allowance, so therefore why should it be considered when someone is applying for discretionary housing payment? Indeed, in my paper, I make the point that Glasgow City Council recently looked at that and took a decision to disregard. So it's not that it's by law or regulation that you have to take it as a consideration under discretionary housing payment. The paper lays that out. Similarly, if I go through the other issues under discretionary housing payment in terms of the questions that are asked, and I think the form does need review in terms of how much alcohol they consume, cigarettes, subscription to TV, etc., how they go swimming, that they could go at a cheaper time. I think that we are verging on some of the civil liberties there, and I think it does. And it's difficult, I understand and appreciate for staff, but I think that we are verging on some of the issues there. Lorna has alluded to it. There was an application of DLA, PIPs and others within the discretion housing payment, and we haven't got to those, is what I heard Lorna say. So we haven't exercised fully those that would be entitled to. So I think as a matter of course within the paper, I think we should be talking or at least making the people aware that we have the money this year and we can offset the difficulty under the size criteria, the bedroom tax. My paper goes on in exemptions, Chair, to decisions of first-tier tribunals, and indeed there was a recent one won at the Stranraer First-Tier Tribunal on size criteria, where the appellant was a disabled person, and they were successful at that, notwithstanding perhaps the report. But nevertheless, I think we should take cognizance of the decisions, and indeed there have been a number of first-tier tribunals that have won the length and breadth of Scotland, so it'd be interesting to just get detail of those that have won so that we can take cognizance, notwithstanding whether the DWP wish to appeal those that have already been won. In terms of the staffing levels, Chair, and I have raised issue to a number of cases where letters still have been going out, threatening letters, and the council were drawn into this. And it's the perception of that, where the council is perceived to be part of the process of eviction, when indeed, as the report lays out, we are there to assist, and staff are there to assist, not to evict. And before there are any cases by an RSL to pursue the evictions, as indeed the sheriff would be asking, what assistance has been given. And we've got to be clear as a council that we were there to assist and render. And I must pay credit to Lorna and her team. That has happened. And evictions, the process has been withdrawn. The process of evictions is still hanging over everyone's head. And there is the no evictions petition was rejected by the Welfare Committee in the Scottish Parliament. And the only saving grace we've got left, or what appears to be left, is the private members' bill, which has been introduced by Jackie Bailey. So I hope that one is successful, and that we have no evictions for the bedroom tax size criteria or anything else. But short of that, then I hope we make it clear that we are there to assist and not part of the eviction process, as the report lays out. On the actual discretionary housing fund, and while there is enough money this year, we are not sure in 2014-15. Again, the DWP have not announced just exactly whether that £658,000 is going to be reduced. If it is reduced, then we have a serious problem facing many tenants out there, thousands in Dumfries and Galloway, but throughout Scotland it's 105,000, I believe. And while the 20 million from the SNP Scottish Government is welcome for 2014-15, it falls well short of the 53 million that would be required to tackle the shortfall or the reduction in housing benefit under the bedroom tax or size criteria. So I think we should be maximising to 2.5 times, as it says in my paper, to make sure that we try and alleviate the hardship, the punishment that is being inflicted on the poor and disabled and everyone else. So in that respect here, my paper lays it out as to what I would hope we can do, because we need to come to a position, and it might be that January is the time, given that we've got the money, but there are things that we need to do. We need to make sure that those on DLA we do treat as a disregard going into 2014-15, notwithstanding what Colin has said, that's a budgetary thing. I would hope we do that. We disregard some of the questions under a review, Chair. I'm conscious that you want me to wind up, Chair, but I hope people take cognizance of my paper.
Okay, thanks very much. A number of points raised there, John. Whether you and Lorna would like to respond to any of them at this point.
Thanks, Chair. I'll maybe run through a few of those that I don't cover. I'll ask Lorna to come in. First of all, in terms of the work that we do with registered social landlords, Councillor Scobie's correct to point out that the paper, the covering report, emphasises that the statutory role that the council has at a number of points in any process that could ultimately lead to eviction is centred around those households and providing appropriate advice and assistance. I'm not sure what we can do about a perception that the council is undertaking work on behalf of the RSLs, because we're clearly not doing that. But what we do have to do is provide advice and assistance both through the Revenues and Benefits Service, but also through the Homelessness Service, and potentially through social work services if there is social work involvement, to undertake statutory duties. and to provide reassurance to members that we will continue to do that. There is a meeting now scheduled with the Board of Management of the two main RSLs in the region, DGHP and Labour, and I think that date's set for towards the end of January with the group leaders of the council. And one of the issues that we'll be exploring is what additional safeguards we can put in over and above the statutory requirements that RSLs currently have to comply with before they start taking any formal legal action. So that is something that will be taken forward through that route and reported back to the subcommittee once that meeting's taken place. In relation to the broad policy position and the assessment process, it is a difficult one to manage, because obviously in terms of assessing how much discretionary housing payment households can have, we really have to respond to the available budget, and I think there is a significant risk for the council to set some key policy positions that would then potentially mean that the council itself is financially exposed to meet those costs if the DWP allocation is limited, because we are by statute limited to how much we can top that fund up. And it becomes a very difficult and complex issue. And based on the experience of the year to date, we've had 3 different levels of DHP since April of this year, and each one has prompted a change in the procedures and the assessment process. Our view at an officer level is that flexibility is required. However, if members feel as though you want to take a more formal policy position in relation to these matters, then certainly we will bring forward a paper in the new year to examine those potential options for you. But it is complex and it is difficult. So just a kind of word of caution in that regard. But certainly what the officers are doing is applying all their experience and knowledge to make those decisions in what is quite a complex and changing environment. In terms of the tribunal decisions, maybe Lorna can come back on that particular issue. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Thanks, John. Yeah, first-tier tribunals, I think the report does say first-tier tribunal decisions are not binding on local authorities. They're a case-by-case basis. We do take cognizance of other tribunal decisions. We do have a network with Scottish local authorities, benefit departments, where we share any first-tier decisions. And there has been, quite rightly said, that we've had some locally first-tier decisions and some throughout the country. And there has been a variety of decisions where disability cases have been highlighted. Some have gone for the claimant and some have gone against the claimant. We do look at them and we'll draw any similarities to our own caseloads where somebody appeals or where we're making a decision, but they're not actually binding on, they're not legally binding on an authority. And we've no jurisdiction to make them binding until the DWP actually changes the regulations to recognise these decisions. I maybe just want to pick up as well the position that we currently are at with DHP and social sector size criteria restrictions. We've been in touch with every tenant now since the increased funding announcement in October. We have either contacted all tenants by phone or by letter. We actually only have 300 cases now where they don't actually have DHP in payment, of which there's about 160 we've got applications in, but we've not processed them yet. And there's about 120, 130 where they just haven't been in contact, but we've written to them and we're working with the RSL to actively pursue these tenants. I don't know of that amount, how many of them actually have DLA in payment, but it's something we can look at and get figures if members choose to have that.
Thank you. Alistair?
Thanks very much indeed, sir. Going back to the point that Colin raised some time ago, let me say for the record that in principle I agree with him, and I would go further and say that to take up John's point, that I personally feel that this authority should be doing everything it legitimately and appropriately can to mitigate the impact of this legislation and those of the people in our region, who need the assistance. And under the term appropriately, sir, I would obviously include such as budgetary implications. I'm not suggesting for one moment that we take decisions in principle today, though it's tempting, from my perspective at least, to take a decision in principle today, subject to the provision of further information. But John, if I understood him correctly, Chair, was offering a further report which would come back and it would flag up the various issues in the various areas where we could in fact develop our policy, for want of a better term. And I personally would like very much need to see that take place because, as I've said, I feel that we should be doing everything we legitimately and appropriately can to mitigate the impact of this legislation. And where there are resource implications, let's flag them up. I'm not trying to make light of the sterling job that John and Lorna and the respective staffs are doing. I am totally appreciative of that. While I appreciate it's complex and difficult on many occasions, it's not, the point I would make, Chair, is that it's not insuperable. And I would like to think that if we can approach this with a can-do attitude, fully aware and cognizant of such as the resource implications that it has in the Council, we should be pursuing that possibility. And I would, if I have to, I will move that today, Chair. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Response, John?
Thanks, Chair. Just to confirm, I'd be happy to bring a report back. I think that report again would be triggered by the DWP funding allocation announcement. I think if we're looking at the next financial year, there will hopefully be a more stable approach to the funding that the Council will get. We already know what the Scottish Government position is, which is the share of the 20 million. So as part of the consideration that we talked about earlier, we could also bring forward a report saying, advising members what the DHP allocation is, potentially giving them flexibility about topping that up if it's less than this year, and then having a discussion and setting out options in terms of the approach that we take and whether there are key policy considerations that members would want to take in terms of any assessment process. If that's what members wish to do, then we'll certainly bring that report forward.
Thank you. Ian?
Thanks, Chairman. Just in regards to Willie's first point, just for clarity, because in my mind, which is the 2.5 times the formula that you're using, he's asking that we claim extra funding for Scottish and UK government. We are at our maximum. I take it the previous report that allowed us, because we were at our maximum with the 262k extra. So just absolute confirmation of that. Just I was reading that within the report, just want to be absolutely sure. I know there's other things within Willie's letter, which we thank him for, because it's good that he brings the council this to the council's attention. Although certainly we're aware of a lot of it anyways, but it's still important that he does. So that's fundamentally it, Chairman. The fact that that money we are allocating out the maximum we can.
John?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just to confirm that the current DHP fund for this year is 1.6 million. That is the statutory maximum. It's 150% more than the DWP allocation. So it's maybe just a different way of phrasing it. But it's the DWP allocation plus 150%, which takes us up to the 1.6 million. We can't increase the pot this year. We're at the absolute maximum.
Thank you. We go to the recommendations, members. 2.1, note the response to the issues set out in Appendix 1 is detailed at paras 3.1 to 3.4 of this report, and ask for a report to be brought back to this committee. Colin?
I think we have to do that, particularly because we don't know what the DWP allocation is, and it'll become quite clear come January, and then obviously we'll potentially have budget considerations before we set the budget in February. But I still would quite like to see the look at the DLA aspect as part of the ongoing work happening obviously during this financial year for the current year's applications, the scope to which we could disregard DLA when it comes to looking back on all these. I'd like to see that happening this year, and not just consideration for future years, potential pots basically.
Lorna?
Yeah, what we can do is we can do an analysis of a current caseload and look at the number of claimants that currently have DLA in payment and actually what their housing benefit shortfall be, and that will give us an idea of actually if we did disregard it, the potential demand there would be on the fund, whether we could physically afford that sort of blanket policy of disregarding DLA. But we'll have a look at that, and we'll maybe have a look at different case types and see if we can split it down even further and bring that to members for a decision.
Okay, thank you. And 2.2, members again are asked to note the that discretionary housing payment funds and procedures will be the subject of future reports to the subcommittee. Yep. At the risk of repeating myself, yeah. Okay, and thanks very much, Wally. Thank you. Item 6, it's not like you. You're not usually as backward coming forward. Item 6 on the agenda, Scottish Welfare Fund and Discretionary Housing Payment Monitoring Report. Do we have anything to add to this report?
Thanks, Chair. Some of the update, obviously the figures when the report was produced was as at October. We now have the November figures, some of which I've just alluded to, that we actually have now for DHP contacted all size criteria tenants in some way, shape or form. The actual spend on the fund has now risen to 797,000, which is 49% of the overall allocation. So there's been quite some considerable awards made. We have reviewed all previous decisions and made sure that it's a full year's award and contacted the other tenants. That resulted in, for November alone, there was just over 1,000 more processes and 1,000 more decisions made during that month. So there was a considerable piece of work undertaken. Happy to take any further questions on it.
Thanks very much. Alistair?
Thanks very much indeed, Chair. The issue that I would focus on would be that contained in paragraph 3.11 of the report, sir, where we're talking about currently consulting on procurement issues for both of the elements which are mentioned earlier, and references made to Scotland Excel having the national contract for furniture and white goods provision in Scotland. And as we've already discussed earlier on today, some of us are of the view that we should be, provided we can ensure value for money, we should be looking in fact to, if need be, to move away from that and to get into an arrangement whereby you're conferring the maximum amount of benefit on the regional economy, i.e. source these items locally to confer the maximum amount of benefit you can, sir, on the economy of Dumfries and Galloway. Be interested, as always, to hear other colleagues' comments and views on that, but that's one I feel quite strongly about.
Thank you. Colin?
I agree entirely with what Alistair's saying. That was the paragraph that stood out for me. I mean, I've got wider concerns about the whole Scotland Excel issue, but that's a debate for another day. But one of the aims of this committee is to mitigate against the impact of welfare reform, and one of the big impacts is on the local economy, not just the individuals affected. I mean, the Scottish Parliament report recently talked about £44 million would be removed from the economy of Dumfries and Galloway as a direct outcome of welfare reform. Yet we're moving to a situation where instead of making payments to individuals, which we can understand why we're moving down that route, we provide goods, but we're effectively providing goods from out with the area. So how does that actually support the local economy, which is one of the downsides of welfare reform, the impact on the local economy. So I'm concerned we're kind of jumping in here without really having what is the implications for that particular move by following the fact that Scotland Excel's got the national contract. You know, it looks almost like Soviet-style central belt fridges or something being distributed by Scotland Excel. It's almost what does this do for local businesses? What's the impact of moving in that direction? So I'm really concerned that we're jumping ahead with this before we've really fully investigated the potential for local procurement and supporting the local economy as well. So I do have concerns about that, with concerns around the food bank side of things as well, that we're effectively replacing payments by a scheme that's already in place when it comes to food parcels as well. But I'm particularly concerned, as Alistair is, over the impact in the local economy of moving the goods through Scotland Excel.
Thank you. Lorna?
Thank you, Chair. I hear what members saying. I think part of the proposal on 311 was that, yes, the intention is for local procurement longer term, but obviously because we have to go through a formal procurement process, we recognise that may take us longer than we would have wished to move to that good. So there was an option of, because Scotland Excel is the national delivery for Scottish Welfare Fund community care grants, that we could have utilised that route. And I'm more than happy to take members' guidance on that. We would rather wait to do local procurement. I'm quite happy with that.
Thank you. Ian?
Thanks. I mean, that point was one of the points I'd like to pick up on. I suppose as we look at our new, as it rolls out formulate, I should say, our new regional economic strategy, whatever we want to call it at that point, that's something we could pick up and put in there, certainly to try and start to address it. See the community care grants and the crisis grants, do we see, because of the festive season coming up and people will be under pressure financially, do we see any pressure, any trends that are possibly empty the pot here? Really, Lorna, is what I'm looking at.
Thanks, Lorna.
There's nothing standing out at the moment. I think we're probably waiting for the Christmas and winter period really to kick in, because I think that's where we see that our biggest pressure is going to be over the next couple of months. I mean, at the moment, I think our community care grant is standing at about 58% of our spend, and crisis is significantly below that. And I think these next few months we'll see if there's actually any trends out there. And we are keeping an eye on, you know, there's certainly, we do know there's multiple applications in some areas, and you know, from certain clients, and we're keeping an eye on that and trying to work with other support agencies and housing providers, where, be it homeless or RSLs, to try and identify any underlying issues for those.
Other members? Ronnie?
It's 311 as well, and it goes on to say about the discussions that took place earlier this month about the food bank providers. I just wondered how that would work. We've already got food banks. Are we buying food to give to people that require it? I mean, how does it work? What's the practicalities of it? And is it not duplication?
Thanks, Lorna.
Thanks, Chair. Part of the reason for the discussion was really to flesh that out, to see how that possibly could work. The view would have been that we would provide food using Scottish Welfare Fund. So yes, we would give money to the food banks, who would then give actual goods to clients. But some of the initial discussions, it's going to prove exceedingly difficult. And I think we've got some further discussions as well to see how geographically we could do that, because you have the whole issue with, you know, we're a large area, how do we get consistency from one end of the area to other? You know, food bank provision in some areas is better than others. And there's quite a number of local charity groups who are not particularly keen to have any sort of formal arrangement, you know, with a large organisation like the council. So the discussion itself was very, I would say, certainly from an officer point of view, was very informative, getting a feedback from food banks, but it probably posed more problems than it did answers at the end of the day. So provision of food as opposed to cash is going to be more problematic, and I think we've still got to come to a view which we'll bring back to members as to what is the best way to take that forward. But certainly at this point in time, it looks more problematic than it does going to, you know, give us any solutions.
Thank you. Go to recommendations. 2.1, note the revised procedure for awarding discretionary housing payment following increased funding as detailed at 3.3. Members happy to note. 2.2, to note the current position with Scottish Welfare Fund as detailed at 3.6. Happy to note. And again to note at 2.3, that should be, I suppose, the work being done to move Scottish Welfare Fund fulfilment from cash to goods as detailed at 3.10. And can we add on to that then that a report be brought back showing members options to use local procurement as a preferred method and the implications of that around Scotland Excel? .11, yep. Ronnie?
Just on the question I asked, if you're taking 3.11 about the food parcel provision, if we're not going to go into partnership, will that come as part of that report? Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, thanks very much. We go on now to item 7 on the agenda, Welfare Reform Communication Plan. This is an update on the previously made decision. Members, any officers, anything you'd like to add to this report?
No, nothing further to add. Chair.
Members, any questions on this report?
Sorry, I just can't remember what an Alice database is. on page 22, 26, item number 16.
Alice was it's a data share, well, not so much a data share, but it was an information gathering database. It was piloted by the Improvement Service, and there's an area, I think it's the NHS Annandale, currently use it to store details of local contacts, and we reviewed whether we could actually roll that out further.
Thank you. Colin?
I'm just wondering what the bullet points around, or the last few, around financial inclusion. It says status transferred. Who's that been transferred to?
Transfer basically means it's now part of the financial inclusion strategy, so rather than the actions running in both the communications plans and the financial inclusion strategy, it's now being picked up through that piece of work.
Will still be reported to this committee as well, yeah.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Chair. Just to clarify, the financial inclusion strategy, the decision is to report that back to the Policy and Resources Committee because it's got a wider reach than purely welfare reform. So it will come back to members on a 6-monthly basis, but back to P&R Committee rather than this committee.
Just a final question. I thought the knowledge hub at the back was quite interesting, but it seemed to me to be practitioners only. The truth is that, you know, you go to who's doing what in the stewardship. You may know where you are now, but does everybody else know this? You know, I mean, I think actually elected members might be quite interested to have a bit of information locally. I don't know whether that could come on a local basis or be reported on a local basis, possibly just as a briefing paper to ping it out as a page just to all members in the areas. Be helpful.
Yes, I think it always been the intention that we would do some sort of mapping exercise to see what was services available in all the areas, and this was going to be one of the places we would use to gather that information. And once that has been gathered, we would take it out of there and put it in a more public place, because obviously general public as well, you know, it's good for them to have that sort of information. So we would use this as a forum to gather that information, but publish anything into a wider network where appropriate.
Thank you. Alistair?
Might it not be possible, sir, to use sort of presentation method on a regular basis to area committees? That you know, on this, because I personally feel, you know, it may very well come up eventually, you know, as part of, you know, sort of wider performance management reports. These reports, I'm obliged to say, are not particularly user friendly, and if you had the likes of, you know, perhaps a presentation at appropriate intervals to such as area committees on the work of your knowledge hubs, etc., I think it would be a good way of bringing it to our attention and keeping it at the forefront of our respective agendas. Merely a suggestion, Chair.
Thank you. I'm sure officers are taking that on board. Thanks very much. We go to the recommendations. Members asked to note progress made toward implementing the communications plan, and at 2.2 to note the imminent release of the partnership hub. I was happy to note. Thanks very much. I have no further business. Thank you for your attendance.